Okay, welcome everybody. You have come to the Trust Revaluation with David Amerland, Oleg Moskalensky, Gina Fiedel, and myself, Kristen Drysdale. We're very happy that you come here to join us today. Trust is a very important issue that affects us all, of course, every day. It's probably the most basic thing that I think that we could talk about, and yet it's so complex. My idea for the trust revaluation is thinking about trust as a currency. We all have like a baseline where we start, like kind of our boundary, and using trust as a currency to get, particularly in the online space, to get to the other side of another person's interface. What do we do to get there? How do we get from where we are to the other side? And I will let our, I don't know, actually I'll just let anyone jump in. Anyone, go ahead and jump in. We're all friends here. And so, and that'd be all formal.
like an invitation, right? To go into the snake pit. Anybody, please? Okay. I mean, that's quite a clever framing, really, because trust is ultimately a form of currency because it allows relational exchanges to take place, and it's what actually enables this to happen. But I suppose the tricky question is, how do you get a person to trust you, which is what you're asking, really, right? And there are so many different ways to do this, depending on the context of the situation. The classic one, and Oleg has repeatedly mentioned this in the past, because it works very well in a business context, and it also works occasionally in a context where trust itself is an unknown variable. So the classic one is reciprocity, which essentially is, I'm going to trust you, and I'm measuring. It's a measured first step. It's not, here I am wide open. In many respects, this is a cultural thing. I think it's quite correct to say that within the wider extent of the US culture, for many different reasons, reciprocity as a trust-building mechanism plays a huge part. And whether it's business or sometimes personal, we open up a little bit. We then see what the other person does, how they respond then governs our response, and so on and so on. Obviously, within that framework, the 4 steps which generate trust are still there. There's still contact, there's still perception, there's still assessment, and ultimately there will be, or not, a connection. So that's the initial way of actually opening up trust. And I mean, there are others, but let's see what everybody else thinks.
I definitely agree with everything that was just stated, but it's interesting to me that sometimes trust works in all kinds of different ways that you don't even expect necessarily, or if you kind of open it up a little bit. If you look at trust, for example, with parents and children, where you have constant break of trust most of the time. They lie, they do something they're not supposed to, everything else, and yet we continue to trust them, to love them. And I think that's the part that makes the trust happen, because of the love factor. In other words, if you have somebody you love, you are willing to forgive their break of trust. It seems like that's usually how it works. With the children, it's usually the example. With adults, it's not exactly to the same level, but similarly. Because if somebody you truly like, you don't necessarily need to love, even like, and they break your trust, but you still like them for some other, whatever the reasons are, then it's more difficult for you to just say, you know what, forget you. I don't ever want to see you again because you broke my trust. So I think that's one interesting thing. Another thing about trust that I think is a little different than what you're describing in terms of the process is the situation with the cover that Kristen had on her post about this particular hangout. And there was 2 guys climbing the mountain. One gentleman is holding on to the edge of the mountain. The other gentleman is holding on to his foot. obviously dangling, one wrong move and he's dead. So on one hand, obviously the second guy who is holding on to the first guy's foot is totally trusting him because his life is in jeopardy. If he doesn't trust him, he won't be able to survive. So he has to trust him. So there is an element where you have no choice but to trust, even though this may be the worst guy in the world, but your life depends on this guy at that particular moment, which is, it's not a hypothetical scenario. It's a real deal. I mean, those kind of things do occur. And then you have the situation with the guy, both of these guys actually, and that is the trust into the mountain. I know it sounds a little weird, but if you think about it, they're trusting the mountain to be able to hold them so they do not die in that particular instance. And so you have a situation where there is no reciprocity. With people, you always, like you were saying, you deal with reciprocity. But when you're dealing with situations like this, where you're blindly trusting into even inanimate object, because that's the only thing that can keep you from dying, then you have this absolutely implicit trust in place, and there's not going to be any reciprocity. So it seems like humans are able to trust both in this reciprocal fashion, but at the same time, they're also able to trust in a completely, totally without any reciprocity fashion as well.
Okay. Let's. I love what you said about parents and children, love and liking somebody, and that's an affective element of trust, which is always part and parcel of it. But let's get rid of the affective element. Let's get rid of the emotion, and let's see how a child-parent relationship actually works. And that is essentially an asymmetric relationship. The power lies with the parent, and within that context, the child is still relatively inexperienced, young. We understand that when they actually break our trust, it's part of a learning process, learning curve, where they themselves are beginning to learn the limits of their ability to do things, the parameters, etc. So you're quite right. Within that context, when the relationship is not quite symmetrical, we're willing to give somebody greater leeway. Sometimes in the hope that in a similar situation we'll get something back, which will be equally forgiving. So you're quite right. I mean, we do that. And if we take a step back from that, from what you said, and actually look at the action itself from our remote position, then the dynamic we see is the extent of trust from the trusting party, not just to the person that they are trusting, but to the future. So basically, you're using trust as a vote of confidence to what is to come. So you're saying, I forgive my son stroke daughter. They broke my trust, but they're learning, etc., etc. And I'm willing to actually extend that because, we justify it with love, etc., and parental duty. But strip of the emotional element, the dynamic still works because there is that connection where we hold the power, and we also think that if we behave like this, then we somehow create a balance where somebody else in a similar position will behave like that towards us.
But like I said, I think it's different. I don't want to consume here. Let Gina and Kristen speak too. But the thing that's different here is that, at least in my personal case, I have this leeway with my kids where almost anything is forgiven at this particular age anyway. Let's put it this way. But I don't have anywhere near the same amount of patience or forgiveness for adults. I just don't. So I think there's a difference. It's not just the way some people are. I think there's a difference of how much trust you're willing to extend depending on the context. I think the context makes a huge difference.
Yeah, well, certainly, because trust is always contextual. But it's also that symmetry in the relationship. And between adults, suppose we meet for the first time in, over an hour, we bond. And you're thinking, well, David may be okay, but, I can, whether I have him as a friend or not is indifferent. And I might think you're super cool, and I really want you as a friend. Now, within that context, the relationship is not symmetrical. I want to be your friend more than you want to be my friend. So that suddenly, changes the entire dynamic.
Right.
Yeah, and are any relationships actually truly symmetrical anyway?
Yes, well, there is. Some of them are relatively symmetrical, and some of them are hugely asymmetrical. And it's the latter that basically create all the issues. Where we have a 60-40 split, for instance, that's not too bad. But if you have a 90-10 split or an 80-20 split, yeah, then you potentially run into a lot of problems.
Yeah, like the two men in that predicament, the guy on top doesn't need to trust the guy holding his leg at all.
No, exactly. Yes.
Like he can be without trust, other than towards the earth, or whatever tree branch is holding him.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't
I'm
know.
not sure I agree with that either. Yeah.
Well, I
don't
guess,
know about
he's got to be sure the guy's not going to yank.
Yeah.
No, the guy below may be his brother, which totally changes the whole formula.
But I'm just talking in the context of, precisely what's going on.
I'm telling you, the guy looks like him. It's his brother.
Are you sure you're not projecting a scenario there?
I think that the trust is already extended from that person.
But let's bring in politics a little bit, and let's talk about the whole deal with Trump going on, everything else. You can see the thing, the fascinating thing to me is the dynamics of how media reports it, how people react. A lot of it, I think, has to do with trust and whom you trust at which point and how. And you see what, like today, Romney talked about Trump, tried to fire back, and you can see that in certain circumstances people hold themselves back because they want people to like them, and I think in that realm of liking them, they wind up hoping that people will trust them because they like them. I mean, like we said before, you would trust people who you like. If you can't stand somebody, you're not going to trust them most likely. But at the same time, there is a level, I think, of threshold where people don't really care. So, Romney comes out making this comment about Trump being a lowlife for the way he conducts himself and so on and so forth, with many people in this and other countries agreeing in terms of his point of view. And so then the Trump comes back, he's not trying to be gracious or anything else, he just says, the guy's a failed candidate, and it's just basically sour grapes, meaning that neither of these men have any interest in getting trust from the other. I mean, that's the way I look at it. You agree with that?
Well, I think right now what we're witnessing in terms of what's happening in the political scene, in the US in particular, but also across the globe, doesn't accurately reflect the way we think politics works. And a lot of it has to do with disenfranchisement and people feeling caught out into a new environment, if you like, where they don't quite know how to behave. I mean, from our perspective, perhaps Romney and Trump have zero interest in trusting each other.
Right.
But I think they both have the fishes which have swum in similar waters. I'd be very surprised if they don't have some kind of personal connection, or at least a professional connection at some point. And it's the same with politicians in opposing political parties. What they project to us and what they do are two different things.
Yeah.
And we can't always read them
So
correctly.
if we look at it that way, I mean, forgetting about politics completely, since we're talking about trust here, does that mean that Trump in this, Romney, I mean, he's not running for anything anyway, but Trump is trying to run. So does that mean that Trump is basically killing his trust capital, if you will, since we're talking about that, by showing this kind of card on the table where he potentially is damaging trust of people towards him because of this kind of situation? Do you think he is losing people because of this behavior, or do you think he's not losing, or does he care on the trust from the trust standpoint? Because if people don't trust him, they're not going to vote for him. I mean, that's just the way it is.
Well, I think he's very visible results driven. Certainly, he's losing a large segment of the electorate, but he's also gaining some, and it's all about perception. If he thinks he's gaining more than he's losing, that's enough for him to continue to do these things.
Right.
A lot of politics, as we see it right now, and this goes across the globe, but particularly in first world countries where it wasn't usually like this, tends to be on an instant reward mechanism, where they try out some kind of behavior, whether it's sound bites or a particular kind of modus operandi, and if it works, then they tend to do more and more of it in some sort of nonsensical way. And That's because of the news cycle and social media, which constantly reinforces that on a very immediate basis. I don't think it has quite the cognitive depth that we should expect it to have. And it's a case of the cycle maturing as we go forward. At the moment, it seems to be working on the surface. We don't know if it's going to actually translate into real political victories.
So let me ask Gina a question then, specifically. I know kind of how Gina is politically, in terms of where she is for the most part, anyway. I know, Gina, I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but
yeah, I'm not good with this.
It's a legitimate question, though.
Okay.
Is there anything Donald Trump can do or say now to gain enough trust from you to vote for him?
Oh my
Anything
God.
at all?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. It's exactly what I thought you were going to say.
Yeah, I mean, that would never have happened.
Yeah.
So, David, with that being the case, we can say that the trust capital is gone. He completely ruined it in terms of
He never
his
had
chance.
it.
No. Hold on. He wasn't, let's just, okay, if you take it from the standpoint he never had it, then it's a moot point discussing it. But
I'll pretend that I used to trust him.
No, not necessarily trust him, but you used to be, let's say, agnostic on the deal. He was just a business guy. He was another guy in the suit who had, a few $1 million, had a bunch of wives, lost his fortune. It's not anything, it's not like you had to trust the guy or not. Now it comes to the point where you do either trust or mistrust the guy, and based on what he's doing, you're saying there's no way in hell under any circumstances. In other words, he completely lost all of his trust capital, to quote Kristen's terminology here, with you. And so I guess my question is that, and any of you maybe can answer it. I mean, I have my own thinking about that, but that's what I was saying, is there anything anyone can do to gain the trust capital back? Forget about Trump. I'm just saying, in that kind of scenario, when somebody says something that's definitively that there's no way in hell, can you overcome something like this? Because in business this happens a lot as well. I mean, not a lot, but it does happen.
You're using the most extreme person.
Sure. And yet, I think it's a great example because of the polarization.
Yeah.
And the answer is yes. The short answer is yes, of course. Anybody can regain trust, provided you're willing to go through the process necessary. And what is the process? The process is this. Essentially, you need to spell out exactly why you did what you did. Because one of the reasons we are willing to extend trust or are willing to withdraw it is because we don't understand intent. If I don't know what motivates you, the relationship between me and you is going to always be a little bit problematic because I don't understand your behavior. I don't understand why you do certain things, which means I can't predict what you do. And if you're unpredictable, that makes you a risk, small risk with a small r, which then means that I don't really trust your motives, your intentions, anything to go smoothly where you're involved in. So essentially, as a Trump in this case, or any kind of business in trouble, essentially you have to explain why you did what you did. You have to explain why you changed. Then you have to explain what you're proposing to do, which proves that you've changed. And then you have to show how people can actually hold you accountable to that change. And if you do those steps, you come back from the cold into the fold. Everything's forgiven, pretty much. People don't forget, but they forgive.
You need to have some matching fundamentals, though, don't you? I mean,
well, here's the thing. I mean, obviously, I suppose you could even go from black to white if there's a good enough reason and a good enough intent and good enough context, and you can logically explain these things. If you do it simply because you want something, let's say, you say, well, I want to be president, and because I like power, and this is what I'm proposing to do in order to get that. Well, I think that kind of intent, honest as it might be, is not good enough to convince people to trust you, because then they think, okay, this is like, putting the wrong person in that kind of context. And same for businesses. If a business says, well, we just wanted to make as much money as possible, so we cheated everybody out of whatever it was we did, but we are reformed now. Well, I'm sorry, that kind of deeply flawed thinking and very superficial value set, it doesn't always sit very well with the people who see it. It doesn't matter how honest you are. I mean, full marks for being honest, but obviously, you're fundamentally flawed to begin with. But if there is a different kind of thing, then, you can show context and you can show how things actually happened and you can make sense of it in a way that actually does make sense, then everybody understands this. And we're all flawed, right? Everybody. So it's not like we wouldn't be as culpable perhaps in a similar situation, which is what allows us to understand this and be understanding in a trust, in a sense of extending trust.
Do you think because we're flawed, that's why we're forgiving people? Because we're flawed?
Well, I should hope so, because we're all flawed products, and
Most of all, anyway.
Yeah, but I think we all are. It just depends on the degree, and certainly, the more isolated we become, or the more pressurized our roles become, the more likely we are to go wrong. Because apart from the fact that we're never perfect to begin with, our brains are incredibly complex. All sorts of things can go wrong. So, we need to keep this in mind.
This makes me think of a conversation that I was having with Rotimi the other night. And for anyone who doesn't know Rotimi, he lives in Nigeria. And when they were having elections, Nigerian elections, this past time, it was like so many people, Nigerians were just like, there's no one good. But the way that Rotimi made his decision was that Buhari was, as he likes to say, he wasn't a cerebral person. However, he's not a thief. And I think that plays into this conversation, because we have our, like the order of our ideals.
Exactly. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's what we call in the vernacular saving grace, right? So it's like you say, oh yeah, he's really bad and he did, but his saving grace was that he did whatever. And we have seen this time and again. Classic example, Schindler's List.
Yeah.
Okay, collaborator, moneymaker. He made incredible amount of money out of the German Nazi regime, and yet he saved all those people, and he did at a tremendous risk to himself, knowingly. That's his saving grace, right? So
right.
How complex can that be as a person? You have both ends of the scale in one being. Any of us can be similarly complex.
And it seems like Trump's, like what I hear, because I am a liberal in a family of conservatives, and so I hear a lot of the other side, and I hear all the time, well, but you know what you're getting. Really? That's his saving grace, is you know what you're getting?
The devil you know.
Yeah.
Okay, okay, this is another important thing, because these are cultural artifacts which we extend precisely in order to create a context which allows us to trust people who shouldn't perhaps be trusted logically. So let's take that in that context, and again, this is how the mechanism works. We need to be able to roughly predict his intent and his behavior, because whenever, let's call politics what it is. It's a gamble. It's a gamble for the future. We hope that the people we elect are going to deliver for us the people we don't elect, which is why we elect the people we elect. So in order for us to take that gamble, we have to be able to somehow minimize the unknown unknowns, which means we need to reduce the risk, which then means we need to find some way to justify our choices. So
Okay,
the devil you know.
Okay. So this is great. Okay, let's put Kristen in the corner for a second then. So you're a liberal, okay, and like David said, nobody's perfect. That's okay.
We like it nevertheless.
let's look at it this way. So I'm assuming you would vote for either Bernie or for Hillary, then, correct?
Feel the burn.
Feel the burn. You're on the burn side. Okay. So okay, so you're not a good person to ask then, because I was hoping you would say Hillary.
No, ask her.
Well, what I was going to say was this: if she was going to vote for Hillary, who definitely has a history of lying all over the place about all kinds of stuff, I guess my question would have been then, okay, how does that, in other words, him being, you see what you get, as your relatives indicated, it's not good enough to trust the guy because he's saying things you don't believe in, and so you wouldn't support it. That's totally understandable. But if you take somebody like on your political side of the spectrum, like her, who can be totally taken apart for all kinds of stuff, how do you still justify trusting her? Is it just being blinded by the political perspective and sticking with it, being basically a party hack, or is there something more to it than that?
That would have been such a great point. Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's brilliant, but it's just that's what I was going to ask.
It is, because I mean, essentially, I mean, what you just did there, Oleg, is you flipped it, right? Yeah. So the argument which Kristen's family is extending towards Trump, we can now also extend towards Hillary, and we say, the devil you know. Always the question is, how much do you know? It comes down to that. How much do you think you can predict, based on what assumptions, based on what facts, and then how do you translate that personally into a hope for the future? And that's what basically determines anything, when it comes to, particularly in politics, but also in business, also in personal relationships. If you pick, if you have, for a guy, say you have 5 women to pick from, they're all pretty much, your type. You're going to go for the one which you think, and we're talking about long-term relationship as opposed to, one night stand. You're gonna go for for the one which you think is going to give you the most agreeable future. So if you know that behind door number 1 is the one which you're gonna have an argument maybe once a week, and behind door number 2 is gonna be twice a week, and behind door number 3 you don't know, and behind door number 4 whatever, and you get to number 5 and you say, well, maybe once a year we'll argue. And if you're pretty confident about this, you're gonna say, yeah, that's the one. So,
but aren't there mitigating factors for each of them? I mean, there's never only one aspect to anybody.
Well, that's what makes any kind of relationship in any context, whether it's personal, whether it's business, whether it's electorate with a candidate who is going for high office, whether it's a brand with its customers, it makes the relationship extremely volatile. Things can be going swimmingly well, and something happens, little fly in the ointment, and suddenly the whole thing just, goes topsy-turvy. And you think, how is that possible? Well, it's possible because once we take a step back and analyze it, once we forget the emotions of betrayal, anxiety, etc., essentially in the cold light of day, it's our assessment of whether we are going to be better off with that person, brand, business, etc. in the future than any other person, brand, business, etc.
Yeah, and then with an election, you've also got the factor of who can beat the other guy.
I want to bring up Ammon's comment real quick, because I think it's pretty good. Politics is a poor example because often our choice is who we distrust the least, and dealing with it's opposites, right?
I mean, if we take that into the example we used with Oleg of the 5 choices for a long-term partner for life, it's like, who do you trust the least to cheat on you?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I mean, Ammon is right in terms of that complexity, okay? Because when we actually calculate whom we trust least, we're also affirming whom we trust the most. And this happens automatically. So,
I just show everything, don't I? Like, oh, that dropped. Oh, no. I could have just been like, calm, but no. You can trust that I will wear my heart on my sleeve, and that you'll be able to see everything in my eyes.
Sorry, my internet just died, and I had to come back. So did I miss anything important? Did you guys cover the fact that after this major picking of the 5 women, you pick one, and then 6 months later, you'll just file for divorce? Did you cover that part?
Yeah,
oh, no.
50, right? One of those 50-50 things. Yeah. And you cannot call a friend, right?
But that's the thing. It's another important factor about trust is that whatever you think you know as of a particular moment, and you know about potentially about yourself to some degree, but definitely not about other people. It's just there's no way to know 100% with absolute certainty that things will be the way they will be because they are the way they are now.
That's exactly, and
I think that
yeah, no, you're spot on. I mean, there's no. This is what makes the whole issue of trust so complex. It's not just, we can take any moment where a relationship has worked or has broken down. We can analyze the dynamic. We can perfectly understand it. Having understood it, we can never guarantee that it's going to work in exactly the same way in a similar context. We can only hope. And then everything that happens, we hope that basically, having that prior knowledge, if we apply it correctly, we are mitigating the risk and we're moving forward. So if, for instance, Oleg says, I went to the local 9/11 bar or whatever, and I picked up this gorgeous blonde, and now she's my wife, no problems whatsoever. You think, okay, maybe we should try it too. You say, what is your pickup line? You can say, you can coach us through this. There's no guarantee that we're going to have exactly the same kind of success. And obviously I'm using a very extreme example here, but it stands. It illustrates the uncertainty factor.
Okay, so since you guys are going there, I'm going to pull up Amazon here. So are we suggesting that we should choose whichever woman gives us the
totally.
It's one of those things we did not want to misread this.
Oh no! In the actual comment stream, it's italicized, so we didn't misread it.
Right, perfect. Okay, that's awesome. Thank you for that,
Ammon's in the house. Hey,
but I think going back to the conversation with currency, I think the time is the key factor there. And even though you can't control what other people will do or how they'll behave, you can certainly control how you're going to behave. So that's one thing. And second, in terms of accumulation of trust, I think over time, that's how you build the currency of trust, is by interacting with somebody over time. They can see the level of trust that they can put in you over interactions over time. The time is the key thing, I think, here to build this currency to a certain moment. You still can ruin it. I mean, it's still totally ruinable. But I think the time definitely plays a huge role in building it.
Yeah, and if you have more instances where the trust wins out than instances where it doesn't, those are going to compile and accrue, to bring that word back in from earlier today. Yeah, so it's sort of, there's been these studies about marriages where the marriages that have enough positive experiences compared to the negative experiences can still survive because there's a certain number of those positive experiences. So you can have a relationship where maybe there have been little bits of chipping away at the trust, but if the bigger trust is intact, then those smaller bits can be sort of discounted.
It's kind of like a bank, right?
What?
It's kind of like a bank, and you make deposits, and you take money out.
Right. And
you
so over
want to
time,
make sure that you're on the positive side always.
Yeah.
And that's like Gina's saying, if you're taking away, you're making some little withdrawals here and there, as long as you continue to put in the big deposits, then you're still going to be okay. But if you keep putting deposits in and also taking the same level or more out, then it doesn't work. There is not going to be any kind of trust capital in place.
And then, of course, the minute there's affect involved, if you're being run by your emotions, it's going to fluctuate a lot more.
Yeah, but that's only for women. David and I are immune to that kind of conversation. Right, David?
Yeah.
We do that.
Men are just never emotional.
Well,
and they have high emotional intelligence, generally.
Yeah, I don't think that like G+ is the right environment to be talking about men not getting emotional.
True.
It's all right. Well, talking about trust as a deposit, which builds up. I mean, the analogy is actually quite good because it's like it's that the number of positive interactions, overall positive engagement, being greater than the occasional negative one. If we take that into the context of branding and brands and relationships between a brand and its customers, this is very much the case. I mean, no brand can ever be perfect. As long as overall they're better than average, better than expected perhaps, then they're winning. It's when you have an aggregation of a lot of negative instances, even if they're small, they become part of a trend, which becomes part of an indicator, and then that begins to have a very negative effect, which erodes brand equity. Pretty much like, a constant fighting over small things can erode a relationship, no matter how good the foundation was to begin with.
I think it's different when you're talking about business, because in business, well, first of all, in business, even though I totally agree with David's, statement before that you're dealing with people in the business, it's not business itself. But at the same time, with that said, still, if I'm dealing with Volkswagen, it's a company that has many people. Some people made bad decisions, which means that the business itself can potentially come back, like you were talking about earlier, David, because it's not the business itself that made it. It's some of the people running it at the time did it, and then you let these people go, somebody else steps in, so there's potentially a new deal where you don't have that kind of flexibility with regular individual trusting between individuals, because there is the person. I mean, like the deal with Trump as an example. Sorry, Donald, I'm going to beat up on you today. The deal with him is that it's just one guy. I mean, yes, he's running a campaign, but it's still one guy. So you can totally take your trust or mistrust against him because there's nobody else to blame there. When you have a company, you have many, many people potentially involved, with some of these people being responsible. Many other people had no idea. I mean, if you look at Volkswagen as an example, the schlubs that were, putting tires on, they have no clue that this was going on. I mean, absolutely, and they cannot be held responsible for that.
Oleg, you are right and not so right, and you're absolutely right with Volkswagen.
You're covering all the bases. You're right and not so right.
No, what I'm really going to say is that you're right in terms of Volkswagen is a huge company, and only part of it perhaps is rotten, but essentially the mechanism which allows us to form a relationship with a brand or a person is the same. We don't have in our heads the bandwidth or the capability perhaps to use different ways of assessing it. So that's where the affective element comes in, the emotional part. We like or dislike Donald Trump sometimes on a visceral basis, based on our own reaction to him, and we form the same love-hate relationship with brands, which is why we feel sometimes so betrayed. Now, when we come to a business, which itself doesn't appear to have a character, however it does, because essentially for a business or a brand to exist, it takes form and shape in something which psychologists call intersubjective space, which is the overlap between objective reality and our own belief system. And in that space, that brand actually has a character, it has a personality. It's almost like it has a voice. We relate to it the same way we would relate to a person. So when VW betrayed that trust, it's actually a big deal. And to pretend, oh, we're going to get rid of the CEO, business as usual. Well, yes, your engineering is perfectly fine. It always has been. That wasn't a problem. So pretending it's business as usual and hoping that the problem would go away isn't really going to work. You really need to show, why did things go wrong? What have you done to set it right?
No, true, but at the same time, David, if you look at smaller businesses, the sign on the front entrance in big letters that says under new management, there is a reason why people put up these signs. And I think that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's because
what they're hoping, you're right, in they're hoping to actually say, hey, brand new relationship, give us a chance.
Exactly.
But that really depends on what's happened before. So if we take that into the context of a restaurant, for instance, where last week you got poisoned, this week, brand new management. Well, I need to be able to show you why you won't get poisoned again before you can give me a chance. But if it's something like, hey, I had a pudding last week and it wasn't as sweet as usual, then that is only a small transgression.
Okay, hold on. So if that's the case, then how you, the restaurant, how are you going to prove to me that I'm not going to be poisoned again if I don't give you a chance and don't trust you to try it again? How can you possibly do that?
This is what you are saying. You got poisoned. You're within your rights now to withdraw trust completely. Now I need to regain that trust. I shouldn't expect you to come in and to see to give me a chance. That's not the way it works. I need to show in a very public way contrition. I need to show changed. I need to show in a very public way how I will make sure you never ever get poisoned again. And if I can do that and convince you, then you'll give me a chance, which begins the relationship I knew, entirely new relationship, which then begins to develop and lengthen and deepen.
I think it's different from different people. I think some people who are flexible enough will say, you're not going to be sending me emails saying, Oleg, we promise you we're not going to poison you like the other guys did. I mean, people just don't do that.
No, they won't do that. You're absolutely right. But a restaurant which essentially understands the issues, because, if you put under new management,
right,
and you really make it a big thing, you understand that the previous management had issues, right?
Right.
Otherwise, you would capitalize on the brand capital of the previous management.
Absolutely.
So essentially, if you understand that there are those issues, then you would work very hard to explain to those whom you have potentially lost or are vacillating what you are doing to be different, what you're doing to set things right.
And again, it comes back to the deposit
And
withdrawal.
if you're not, the expectation. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. I think we had lag. Go ahead.
I was going to say, if you don't do that, you should have no expectation that they will come back, that they will give you a second chance.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think it's a little bit subjective. I think it's depending on the person and what their open-mindedness, if you will, is towards certain things, towards certain brands. I mean, it's just, like I said, I think it depends on the situation and depends on the people itself. But I generally concur. I mean, Gina, do you have any examples where you had some major, client from hell and then you still try to somehow make it work and stuff?
Too many of them, actually. Yeah, I have a high trust threshold in those situations, and I am the kind of person who will look for the best in someone, and so I'll try to mitigate whatever happened by keeping it kind of in its own channel. And I've been training myself to do that less, as a matter of fact, because it's not actually that great an idea. But yeah, it's funny that you asked if I had an example, because I've been trying to think of examples for all the things that we're talking about, actually. And I had something recently that was really interesting to me. It's a little bit different, but I've had a very long-term relationship with a colleague who does a lot of work for us. And nobody that any of you know. And I did something that for them was outside of integrity. And for me, it was not outside of integrity at all. And what it ended up coming down to in a series of conversations where I was like, you've trusted me for so many years, and I always have your best interest at heart. Where's that trust now? Because this person was making assumptions about my motivations that were incorrect. And what came back to me was, absolutely, I totally know that you have my best interests at heart, and I trust you implicitly, and I have for as long as I can remember. So it's really interesting to me that somebody can feel that you've betrayed them and yet still have that trust completely intact. And everything worked out, by the way. We sorted the whole thing out. Everything's great. But it was a really interesting moment for me when I just kind of all of a sudden thought, well, wait a minute. Why is the trust degrading in this moment when it's so solid? And I don't know, it's just an interesting situation.
I think I know why. You want to know why?
Sure.
Because of the interaction of the person with other people who betrayed them time and time again. And I don't think it had anything to do with you. But just the fact that you have this experience, and all of us have had these experiences, then I think it winds up being a deal where you're putting up this little wall of caution, knowing that, look, these other people did it. Anybody can potentially, we all know that anybody can do it. And so in this particular case, obviously they misunderstood the intent. So it was their perception, as they were saying, that was completely wrong. But I think that's where it came from. I don't think it was you at all.
Yeah, and I think there's projection involved too, because frankly, this person has done things out of integrity towards me and apologized for it. So it tends to be something that they might. I don't know. It was just a really interesting thing when it all finally came down to where is the trust here.
But I think this is where we go back to the deal with capital being built over time,
Right.
because you said you did have a really good relation with them for a long time, and it was implicit trust. So this one little incident rubbed both of you the wrong way where you needed to talk about it. But once you got done talking about it, you got back to normal relationship, which proves right there that that capital that you built is in place and working, just like Kristen mentioned. Yep.
And that's the problem, though. You said back to the normal relationship. It can't get back to the normal relationship. It's never going to be what the normal relationship.
Not exactly. It can be normal, just not exactly the same the way it used to be. Right. I agree.
Wait. What? We were talking at the same time, so I missed it. It felt like
what
we went back
David
to
said.
the way things were prior.
Trust David. Whatever David says.
Okay. You
No, I think she was just saying that it would never be exactly the same going forward because of this little bit of a spat. It cannot be 100%. It may be 99%, but I think I agree with Kristen on that. Yeah.
And I believe maybe this is just me. I don't know, but unless it's going to be a better relationship, I don't see any point in going further unless you can repair the damages to the point where both sides can say, wow, we learned a lot from this, and we're never going to do things quite in that way again. We've got this outlined so that we can have steps in place to not repeat that, but to make the process better. It's like quality control, right?
Yeah.
Go forward with something more clear.
That's kind of the whole point of investing in the relationship and bothering to work it and hash it out, and that's where we were both coming from. I mean, and in any good relationship, I mean, you've got to have tumultuous times. It's just there's no such thing really as a relationship that doesn't have bumps and hurdles. So it's how you deal with them and how you work it through. And we happen to have a really great way of working things through. So
you mean you can never have a perfect relationship without any difficulties in there at all?
I think that she's saying that like you have to be willing to have like those bumps, and a good relationship will have the bumps, right?
No, David, have we had any bumps? I don't think we've had any bumps.
No, we haven't. I mean, it's all relative, right? Because I think it depends on how you define bumps. For some people it may be something really big, and for some others it may just be a little thing which they can just overlook. And I think within that context, you and I have disagreed on lots of things, but has never been a problem.
No, not at all.
Yeah, which is absolutely perfectly great. But I think that's what I mean in terms of not a perfect relationship. And it would have been really weird if we both agreed on absolutely everything 100% all the time.
Right. Right.
I don't know which one of you I would still be friends with. Like
I think that comes back to an issue of both mutual respect, and I think respect plays a huge role in doing the trust thing, because and it needs to be, that's what I'm saying, it has to be reciprocal too. In other words, if you have respect for somebody and they couldn't care less about you, it's not going to work. It needs to be both, in both directions. It needs to be kind of true without forcing somebody or telling somebody that you need to do something for me or else. I mean, if you get to that point, it's nothing. It doesn't mean anything. So I think some people, click. And I don't know how to describe the word click. I just know that you and I did click for the most part. It has nothing to do with having some disagreements on certain issues. It's just, for the most part, and it's difficult to explain that. But with some people, you just do that. And with other people, as much as you try, as much as you basically bend backwards sometimes, and you still cannot do anything. They just do not reciprocate for whatever reason, good or bad. It doesn't matter.
I think like Gina and I are pretty much the same way. Like we've never had.
We don't disagree on anything though.
There you go. Perfect relationship. But Oleg made a couple of incredibly important points. Now let's start with the smallest of the two, which is people clicking, which is we say from a cultural perspective, somebody rubs you up the wrong way. And all you mean by that is that somehow, whatever they say you object to without really knowing why, but you find them disagreeable. And then eventually you will find something big to disagree with them about. But that's the clicking thing, and it comes down to the way we have been hardwired to assess people, know whether we can work with them or not, whether we can trust them to, I was going to say, to have our back. And that, that you go back to tribal times. You say everybody in a small, tightly knit community depend on each other for survival, even though they may not all have been totally agreeable with each other. But on the big things, they were all, they all could be counted to do the right thing. And that's where the clicking comes in. And Oleg said the other thing, which is really important, which I have mentioned a couple of times when I was writing The Tribe That Discovered Trust, is that there have been studies which show that irrationally we are prepared to trust strangers. And study after study has shown this. And you think, that is really weird. Why would we be prepared to trust a stranger when we know nothing about them? We're not, we don't have nothing to assess them with. And by trusting them, we are making ourselves weak. And the studies have shown that the context in which this irrationality takes place is one in which we actually are willing to extend respect towards the other person. And even though we may not know them, provided we're willing to trust them, because then that reflects a deeper a belief and extension of our understanding in the deeper structure that holds them in place. If we don't trust them, and this is where a lot of the times we get cross-cultural mistrust, if we don't respect them because we believe that perhaps they come from an inferior culture or an inferior country or whatever, it doesn't matter how much they try to click with us, we're not willing to trust them because we'll say we know nothing about them. But what really matters is not what we know about them, but whether we're willing to respect them, because it means then we understand their cultural context and the wider belief system that governs them, and we are willing to actually cognitively give that credibility. It's a case of, suppose somebody comes and is really personable, and he comes to our group, and we all begin to like him, and then he lets slip that he's a Scientologist. Immediately, the trust levels drop, right?
It depends. If it's Tom Cruise, I wouldn't trust dropping the trust level.
We don't trust him
on that. If it's Travolta, I wouldn't trust him either. No problem there.
Especially when he's dressed as a woman.
All right, Kristen, can you flash my version of the cover of the book, since David mentioned the book? So everybody knows
you've got it every time you talk. Or do I hit this arrow? That's what I was looking at. There we go.
You hit the book. There we go. If anybody wants to buy a book, this cover is very exclusive. You can't get it anywhere. So, but you can get a regular cover. You can get a regular cover book at davidamerland.com, at amazon.com, at barnesandnoble.com, at, if Gina Fiedel had a bookstore, it'll be at ginafiedel.com. It's everywhere, basically.
Yes. And that sounds like a good brand, actually, doesn't it?
ginafiedel.com.
Yeah, it has almost that fidelity element in it, which immediately you want to trust.
Well, I do own the URL, so it's just been sitting there waiting for me.
Awesome. Let me see. Well, okay, so I'm going to trust that Anna's comment is something good because I haven't read it yet, but I'm going to put it on the screen. Sometimes we extend trust as a sacrificial move. Extend trust now on this thing you can afford to be betrayed on, and if you can probably trust them with more serious issues at your back.
Well, again, I mean, Amon makes, that's an incredibly important point. Personally, we all have this. We all know, we all have friends we don't entirely trust to do certain things, and yet we trust them to do other things. And this is the complexity of the context and the connections and the evolution of relationships we actually form. And Amon is absolutely right here that you can trust some people to do something which perhaps would be absolutely critical, and you think very few people would do it, and yet you may not be able to trust them with little things. You may not be able to trust them to take your dog out for a walk in a particular time because they will let you down. And yet they might be able to hide you from the cops when you're on the run, for instance, because they will have your back. I mean, it's that kind of complexity that makes both relationships and trust, because they go hand in hand, so difficult to predict, so difficult to actually get right. And it's a constant evolution. We never stop assessing a relationship and the things that happen within it, the context where everything happens in, and the trust that arises out of all those things.
Yep. David, can I ask you a personal question?
Yeah, sure.
How can you possibly go, and I'm serious, I'm not joking here,
Okay.
from laughing out loud and making jokes to immediate seriousness literally within a frame? How can you do this?
Oh, I don't know. Well, I'm actually enjoying myself in both. When I'm actually talking and I'm working things out in my head, so it's quite easy for me to keep a serious expression. But this is immense fun, and I find a lot of the things which I do these days incredibly enjoyable. So the hilarity part is spontaneous.
Also, the reason is, just so all of you know, David actually ordered from Amazon an axe today. And
I did,
so,
yeah.
he knows that
I did.
if you do not trust him or come up with something that he doesn't like, he knows exactly how to deal with you.
And I'll be able to find out where you live.
Exactly. So, Kristen, did you want to bring somebody from the audience so we can potentially give away a book?
Yeah, I'd love to. If I was just asking you that in the chat. Okay, so how should we do this?
So you bring somebody into the deal. They ask David the question.
Like whoever is camera ready and says
Gina
it
answers
first.
it. You control the whole thing, and I send them the book.
Okay, whoever is camera ready and would like to come on and ask a question, let us know in the chat. Whoever goes first, we'll bring in.
Yeah. Camera ready, what it means you took a shower in the last 15
minutes.
minutes.
Yeah, well, you don't. You can be. It can just be your voice. It can be just your voice.
If it's a guy, makeup is not necessary. Just FYI.
Unless you're Eddie Izzard, but he's party past.
Well, I think we get a raw deal here. Girls can just. And
David,
we don't
it's a blessing. Trust me, it's a blessing. don't think it's a raw deal. It's a blessing.
Okay, I'll go with it.
Up with polar bear blood all over, though. Trying to do that. Gina said, "Take a shower."
Wait.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, so nobody's coming in. Is that what I'm seeing? Nobody gets a book?
So. I think that this is off hours for Pepper.
Everybody has a bad hair day? Is that the deal? You can't trust anybody to show their face?
I don't have the window open, so I don't even know who's here.
It doesn't even have to be like I said. It can be just a voice.
Does Zaman have the book?
I don't know.
Ask him.
Come in. Yeah. I put it in our chat that's open right now, but I'm sure he hears. I'm gonna, while we're waiting, we're gonna do a little pause. And David, go ahead and please talk about the specs of your axe. And I'm gonna turn the lights on because, yeah, my camera's getting kind of wonky.
Okay. My axe. It's a tomahawk. It's actually a war tomahawk, so it can go through armor. So not even armor can save you.
So does everybody now understand the age level of David Amerland? Do you guys get it now?
We will not go there.
I just wanted to bring it up so, since we're everybody trusts each other here.
Yeah, we do. Full transparency, I'm about 6.
5.5.
Sometimes. Yeah, well, I said about, right? Hedging my bets.
So did she leave permanently or is she coming back?
I don't know.
She's coming back.
Did not say. She's coming back, yes.
Did she go to take another shower maybe? No?
I don't think we should be talking about showers right now.
Well, people trust us to talk about trust, so might as well talk about showers.
Showers and elections, right?
All right, so while we're talking, we already covered the election, so we know the election deal. Here's for those, I guess she's gone, so she can't put it up. That's David's tomahawk, as he calls it.
Yes.
Right there.
And it's rubber, yeah?
It's a training one, so it hasn't got an edge.
It doesn't? Oh my God! I'm taking it off the screen then. I thought it was a real deal.
Well, it can do damage because I have I mean, when I use it to train, it can go through bamboo, which has the same consistency as human bone.
Yeah.
So it's actually quite good. But it hasn't got an edge as a safeguard to myself while I'm training with it.
Okay, Preston,
Yes.
could you please put up the picture for a second so people can see the
Yes.
tomahawk in question? First, we talked about it piercing armor. Now we're just talking about little bamboos, like Kung Fu
No,
Panda
it will
3
go.
type.
I mean, the spike at the end will go through armor even without the edge. So it's actually quite lethal. But the front bit is, you can get the ones which are razor sharp,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not advisable while you're training.
Okay, so we're going to have another hangout coming up about weapons that David Amerland uses. We're going to talk about his victims.
My growing collection, yes.
We're going to talk about his victims, people he doesn't trust, that are no longer with us.
Does David Amerland have trust issues, and is that why he's weapons training?
Correct.
Can I bring my zombie killer knife?
Absolutely. What we need is a zombie.
Right, so everybody, just wanted to, another public announcement. After you buy David's book, for something to read at night, tomorrow House of Cards starts, season 4. So very excited here for that. Okay, who do we have?
Someone is coming.
Yep, we're gonna have. I thought it would be fun to go through my purse, like just on the fly, and to see how many knives I have in here right now. But
I wasn't camera ready, but even without being camera ready, I can put something on the screen.
There we go.
A Yoda thing. No worries on that one.
Kind of your mood today, huh?
So Emma, do you have David's book on trust?
I don't yet. I must admit.
Okay, you're the one. You'll be the recipient then, if that's the case.
Cool.
Excellent.
So trust. I mean, it is a huge topic, and it is, as you were saying earlier, it's one of these very contextual things. We trust people implicitly with one thing and not at all with another. Think of somebody who you would trust with your life, but you wouldn't leave alone with your daughter.
Yes.
There are these very complex and contextual things that we are reevaluating all the time in our lives. Is business trust its own kind of field? Because it is a different kind of mechanism in play, isn't it?
Yes and no. Okay, and you're right. Why do I say yes and no? Yes, because trust in a business environment has to stem from the personal level and personal experience of trust that each participant has developed. Having said that, the business environment creates a context which is which works in its own right. Trust is always a contextual thing. Within that context, you can have perhaps the unlikely scenario of two totally untrustworthy parties entering into an agreement and both of them behaving impeccably well within it. And the classic example here is, honor amongst thieves, for instance, where you can have one gang of thieves making a deal, a territorial deal in agreement with another gang of thieves, and they all stick to the letters, to the letter of their agreement, stipulate by whatever sort of deal they actually all agreed on, and it can work perfectly well. So
I'm going to have to trip you up here, don't you? Because the whole saying is there is no honor among thieves.
That's well, that is another context, which again has cultural reason, right? Within perhaps certain societies and certain cultures, and we've got to remember that trust is always contextual, and as such is always cultural. So what will work in creating a trustworthy environment, perhaps in the U.S. and perhaps even more localized in specific areas of the U.S., would not work in the U.K. and and within specific areas of the U.K. So this is what makes it so difficult. But in a broader sense, any kind of business environment creates a context which can be analyzed in a dynamic, which everybody sees in terms of pluses and minuses. So irrespective of the specific aspects of the people who are there, they can basically agree to things, and provided they have safeguards and sufficient penalties, then they can have a perfectly good relationship. And historically, we have had that. You know, in the West, we had the Cold War for a long time, which was guaranteed to create a balance of power through mutually assured destruction. Total madness. You know, basically, we said, if you nuke us, we'll nuke you back. We're going to destroy the planet. Everybody will lose. And it worked. You know, although the West and Russia at the time, and you know the Eastern Bloc did incredibly weird things. They fought proxy wars. They had spies everywhere. You know, all sorts of things happened. Despite all of that, the overall agreement held, and here we are. We didn't blow up the planet.
Yeah, yeah.
Almost did, though.
Yes, I mean, you can look at the Cuban Missile Crisis and say, you know what,
can,
mutually assured
absolutely.
destruction didn't stop them pushing it right to the edge.
Well, I mean, everything we said about trusts and relationships comes from intent, understanding motives, which allow us to predict intent. What happened at the Cuban Missile Crisis was a series of misunderstandings which were exacerbated by the time lag of the communication between the two sides, which brought the world to nuclear disaster. And from that, like Gina said in her relationship with a business partner, what happened? We installed the hotline between Moscow and Washington, improving the relationship, despite the fact that here we were ready to burn the planet.
Yeah.
So, you know, we understood that, you know, this was not what either side wanted. If anything, the crisis deepened the trust that both had, because they both suddenly understood that despite whatever differences they may have had, neither side wanted to destroy the other side and be destroyed back. So that actually allowed for a better relationship to move forward.
And now we have a great relationship.
Yes. Well, there you go. Nothing is forever. You know, this is the whole thing. This is the context. This is why it's so difficult. I mean, you know, we think of brands and businesses, and you think, you know, I mean, Amon is in the UK. He knows that one of the best, number one retailer in the UK is a John Lewis partnership. That's a battle that's fought again and again and again every week. He has never said, "Oh, we're the best. That's it. We can rest easy now." The moment you say that, what happens? Things go wrong. You lose ground. Your brand is burned. Your business suffers. So you constantly have to reinforce it. You constantly have to work at it. You constantly have to evolve because your audience evolves.
And you certainly have to invest in it, because there was a time, of course, when Marks and Spencer were the company that had that reputation. They had superb benefits. They were the first to offer free hairdressing to all the women in their shops, because they want their staff to look good. So, you know, they would pay for free hairdressing, free beauty treatments, all kinds of things like that. And over the years, as money got tight, these little benefits get cut, and it changes the whole ethos and atmosphere. And of course, it's much harder when you've had a benefit and it's taken away. That hits you a lot harder than, you know, the boost of getting a new benefit would go in the opposite direction.
Yeah. I mean, again, Amon is right in his assessment here. In '95, that's when I first entered the John Lewis partnership. At the time, Marks and Spencer was the number one retailer in Europe, really, because they had expanded in France at the time. They had outlets in France, they had outlets in Spain, and they were thinking of opening up in Germany and Greece. And funnily enough, in Greece, they still have one. I came across it the other day. Within 5 years, from '95 to 2000, Marks and Spencer lost basically all of that. They had to close down their French outlets. They had to shrink back their businesses globally, and they lost the number one slot as retailers in Britain to the John Lewis partnership. And it all came down to those small decisions which formed the relationship between the brand, the branches, and their customers. And they haven't quite got it back. You're quite right.
No, I honestly don't think that they will now. I think they made hard decisions, and as long as somebody wants to justify those, then they're going to stand by their guns. And you know, John Lewis was in a different position.
That's such a truth, because for people in the US who don't know how big Marks and Spencers were, you know, they had their own brand, which was St. Michael's, and there used to be the Gospel of St. Michael's pretty much in terms of how much people loved that brand, and they have made a series of wrong decisions. They have never acknowledged the depth of that mistake. They've always tried to think, oh, we're just going to improve and it's going to be business as usual. And every step since has basically further eroded the trust, has further widened the gap between them and their potential audience they're trying to reach. They've lost part of the audience they did have. It's become so hard for them to recover because of that accumulation of mistakes that Amon has mentioned.
Are there some good examples of businesses that have gotten it right, where they have lost trust and then regained it back through the steps that they've taken?
Yep. A classic example, I'm going to give the Tylenol case in the US. Johnson & Johnson. And, for those who don't remember, it was the 80s, Johnson & Johnson Tylenol. Tylenol was the #1 brand at the time for Johnson & Johnson. It was almost bigger than the rest of the company combined. And what happened was that there were 7 cases of poison Tylenol tablets in supermarkets, which had arsenic in them, and they resulted in 7 deaths. Now, look at the situation here, and let's compare it a little bit to VW, because the comparison is inevitable. It was not Johnson & Johnson's fault. Really, they could have said, well, we manufacture something great, we put it in the supermarkets. If the supermarkets can't keep it clean, that's their problem, not ours. So they could have said, we sell like 1 billion tablets, and we can basically live with that. They didn't say that either. What they did do, and that's down to the leadership they had at the time, which was James Burke. It was that essentially he drew together a war council. They withdrew every single one of them from the market. They basically owned the conversation space by keeping everybody informed of what they were doing and why and what steps they were taking. And that's so difficult to do at the time, because all they had to do this with was press releases and news reports. There was no social media, there was no internet, there was nothing of the kind. They kept everybody abreast of everything. They basically innovated by creating the first tamper-proof medicine bottles in history, and they reworked the entire line. They were willing to burn the company down if necessary, because the team said, what we put first is not our profits, but the safety of our customers.
I still remember when I went to the store to buy Tylenol and it wasn't there.
Yeah.
The shock of that. And I also remember when it finally came back.
I do too, like the day.
And we were all so happy to buy it again by then.
Within a year of coming back, it was like, like nothing had ever happened. People absolutely loved them. Yeah, but look at how much it cost them, right? What they were prepared to do. And if we compare with VW now, where they basically lied to the world, stole money from the US taxpayer through EPA subsidies for their vehicles, whom allegedly at the time met EPA environmental standards, and now we know they didn't. What have they said? Well, in Detroit, they said publicly, oh, we didn't lie, it was a misunderstanding. That was their public stance from their CEO. What have they done since? Well, they had 2 fall guys who are, basically not very big. They've changed the CEO of the company publicly, and they said business as usual. Well, sorry, this is not good enough, because you haven't convinced us that you wouldn't do it again. So, totally different.
But in reality, though, David, most of the time, I think companies do get away with this stuff and they do come back. Vast majority of the time. I mean, you have specific cases, very few. Like, for example, Enron is the biggest example of company actually tanking completely. But if you look at all the other people, you look at BP Oil with the spill. I mean, that was a big deal. You look at, VW right now, it's still standing. I think they're going to continue to stand. Even though I'm not buying any VWs, they're still going to.
I know, I understand that. Let's look at those 2, for instance. BP actually, despite what they did make reparations, and they continue to do so, and they set up the fund, and they did so very publicly. So although what they did was really, really bad, worst environmental disaster ever, it cost them an enormous amount of money, and they actually put that money to work. Whereas now VW hasn't. And this is where we can get emotional and get outraged and say, well, the hell with you, we want you to burn to the ground. But that's not fair either, because as you mentioned before, VW is not, they're not all crooks. It's not a company of crooks. It's a company that made a mistake.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and within the wider economy of VW, we're looking at an ecosystem that's worth some 335 billion euros because it's a massive environment. And if you take that away and burn it, suddenly you're punishing all these people for a lot of things which they haven't done. So, you know, the emotional aspect of us that wants to punish people or punish companies and burn them to the ground, well, you know, that's wrong as well. I think there should be a measured response and a measured effect, but we should always demand and get that transparency, which stops things from going wrong again and again.
Don't you find this is something that has changed over recent years? I mean, the whole thing of CEOs getting huge salaries, the whole thing of bosses getting huge salaries started in the days when there was still the buck stops here. Anything that goes wrong in that company, that guy is paid so well because it's his job to stand up and say, it's my fault, to fall on his sword and take the heat for the company. But these days, they want to have those huge salaries and not fall on their sword. And if they do have to go, they want an extra huge golden parachute.
I think. Yeah,
but the funny thing, Amon, is they do get it. That's the thing that always just amazes me. They not only want it, but they actually get this parachute, which just totally baffles me.
Amon is right that in the space between the 80s and the end of the century, things changed a lot. And, you know, case in point, Tylenol, which happened back then, and then, you know, there have been other things with Johnson & Johnson more recently, and they hadn't been handled as well. Same company, right? Same deep culture.
Right.
I think, you know, as we got to the closing years of the 20th century, an accumulation of errors, or perhaps an accumulation of, let's call them systemic errors, which were not fit for purpose, reached the point where, you know, we basically got what we got. What we're trying to fix now in the 21st century is the legacy of all those things, and it's not an easy thing because, you know, things move and evolve, and we have our own problems, our own pressures as we move into the 21st century, and we're still trying to change those systems again without breaking them, without burning them to the ground. And what you said, Amon, is absolutely right. I think things will gradually change again for the better.
We can certainly hope so. But it does seem, doesn't it, that watching others does dictate how, you know, people will respond. So any company that saw, well, the banks get away with the huge financial meltdown when nobody at the top took any responsibility. Nobody lost.
Yeah, it's a case of, it's a case of social trust. This is what it is. It's a case of. I actually
liked the BP case because they actually did send over somebody who was very senior in the company, who had nothing to do with it. They accepted, oh yeah, this British company has done terrible things to America, even though everybody working with that pipeline was American, Mexican, or Canadian.
Yes.
A British person hadn't touched the thing, you know, because as long as that anger was directed somewhere, they could control it.
Yes, but I mean that's, you know, that's the you know, that intersubjective space where a brand actually has a character and it has a voice and it has a responsibility. It's an entity in many ways because we believe that's what it is, and that's where things have to happen.
So things like that work with larger companies. What if you're a small business and you don't have a budget like that, where you can't just do everything that Tylenol did, take all those steps? You just don't have it in your budget. You'd like to.
It really depends on the scale, doesn't it? I mean, you know, a small business will have a smaller scale to begin with, so its exposure will be smaller, and hopefully it will not face something as drastic. You know, a customer service issue going wrong is not the same as having some of your customers die because of your product. And
let's take that example that came up jokingly earlier. You've got a restaurant. It's a small business. One of your customers gets food poisoning.
Yes.
It's tied to your business. What is the next step for a small business to take? Well, first thing, they've got to own the problem. Yes, this happened. Here's how it happened. Here's how we're making sure it will never happen again. and really taking that thing of being so thorough. I mean, the equivalent of the Johnson & Johnson, shut the restaurant, steam clean it top to bottom. We know that this was actually a bad delivery of goods, but even so, we're taking this time to upgrade the hygiene throughout. We're taking time to reevaluate how and which suppliers we use and so on and so on. Make a big deal of it. Show people that you care, and that's where the trust comes in. We all make mistakes. The difference is whether the company actually seems to care that it made one, or whether it just shrugged and went, you don't matter.
Yeah, oh my goodness. I'm really paying attention here now because I'm at the end of like customer service where I'm going out and I'm actually talking to right taggers, and I'm seeing like through the right tag account, like I have my Carson Drysdale account, but I also have the right tag account, and how we deal with issues, and then watching other brands throughout Twitter and how they deal with issues, and some, like, this person has been like asking you this question for 30 days and you haven't responded. Like, what are you thinking? Just respond. Give them something. Say, I don't know how to fix this. Want to jump into a call with me or something so that you can still keep that personal tie. Like, it doesn't matter if you can fix it or not sometimes. Sometimes the best solution is to send them somewhere else where they can receive the service that they're looking for. But you have to at least respond.
And sometimes you can turn a mistake or a situation like that, a conflict, into, you know, recruiting new followers, recruiting new customers, recruiting deeper trust, and use it as an opportunity, actually. So sometimes you can really turn it around, and it depends on what your attitude is going to be when that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, Amon said that you've got to show you care. I mean, it's as simple as that, and then it's as complicated as that. And he's absolutely right. I mean, he speaks from experience because he has dealt with brands before. That if you can't show that, then, you know, whatever else you do is immaterial.
Yeah, but also if you look at some of the brands, like if you look at, for example, you know, the things that come to mind, things like Jack in the Box, for example, where they had a big E. coli thing a number of years back here, at least in Seattle area. And yeah, there's hundreds of people got sick, and it wasn't some little deal. And you know, and there was a lot of different recalls you hear all the time about, you know, Trader Joe's recalling something or Costco recalling something. Costco definitely several times recently they had some recalls. And so, you know, these companies, I mean, that's an example of a company that should be losing trust within their clientele because they royally screwed up. If they're recalling their products, they definitely royally screwed up. But that's what I mean about people forgiving them. You know, they do come back. They don't all go out and completely, you know, completely go out of business. They just wind up kind of regrouping and, you know, I don't know if anybody actually loses their job or anything, but possibly, and, you know, do what they can to get back.
I think it depends on the nature of the relationship, as always, Oleg. You know, let's say with Costco, which is a price-sensitive kind of price point sensitive kind of buy. People who use Costco, you know, they're on tight budgets, so the options which you have are fairly limited anyway. And this is something which they're taking advantage of. But if you go into higher ticket items, like a VW, for instance, where the same amount of money which you're going to spend in VW will be, as you know, can be spent anywhere else, and buy you another car, then that is something which allows the person who makes the purchase decision to exercise a lot more of their disaffection, if you like.
But also, I think, you know, one thing we didn't talk about at all in this conversation, so I think we could probably spend another hour talking about that, is the situation with rationale, you know, dealing with people who are rational. And that's another huge equation in the whole trust thing, because if people are irrational, then the only way that they gain trust is through either force or violence. That's the only way they can possibly gain trust. And it's not so much that they gain trust, they just, because of the fear, I guess, that people, I mean, if you look at it, let's look at the, you know, the terrorists as an example. Like, you look at the whole ISIS situation. How,
I don't think we trust them in anything.
well, so how do the people wind up trusting them to join their ranks? If you look at it from that perspective, considering
think
all
you're
the things that they do.
Oleg, I think you're dealing here with religion as opposed to a system. Rather, I mean, religion in many ways is a system. So I need to quantify this. But religion operates within a certain dynamic where you have blind obedience. And within that context, a huge element of the rationality which you value, which I value, which most people value, simply gets co-opted to that blind obedience, if you like, where there's hope against hope that things will work out because it's the commandment from above, a force greater than ourselves. So if you think that, if you're willing to put your faith in that, then the trust which you're extending is totally irrational, except from your point of view. And it's fine within that context. It seems bizarre to us outside that context, but within that context that those people operate, it seems perfectly fine.
I don't think it's that simple, because you have tons of people who are religious who do not follow these kind of principles and do not do these kind of atrocious acts.
I'm not saying that the moment you become religious, you would automatically behave like that. But there's a certain degree of religious belief, and even within Christianity, even within Buddhism or Hinduism, which is just as extreme, which requires just as sort of irrational behavior. Not quite on the same degree, maybe, but so it's one of these things. It's a system that you're in. We spoke of Scientology before, which has
right.
It's just as wacky. Okay, they don't go out and behead anybody, but then they're not trying to take over the world.
I don't know, but also you have plenty of people who who are saying Muslims and they don't behave like this. I don't think it's
absolutely. You have plenty of Christians who they're devout Christians and they go to church and they don't behave like that. You have plenty of people who are not in that extreme kind of situation, but this is the complexity of the religious beliefs we have. There are systems within systems within systems, and because it's an interpretive system of behavior and governance, it can be abused to all sorts of ends.
Okay, so the bottom line, David says, don't trust religious people. We got it.
No, I would say, what I would say if I said anything within a religious context is that you should be very clear on what you're going into and why. If you're willing to put your faith into a higher being and accept his or her existence as written in tomes which are like thousands of years old, fine. That's nobody's going to judge you on that except yourself. And you should be fully aware of what you're getting and why. And if you're going to go to the other extreme and say, I don't believe in God, I'm an atheist, I'm a rationalist, I believe in science and whatever, again, that's perfectly fine, provided you know what you're getting and you understand it. So understand yourself. I think things go very wrong if we don't understand ourselves and hope against hope that believing in something will allow us to understand our purpose in life. Things have gone so wrong within that context. Wars have been fought, crusades have burned civilizations to the ground, and what we're seeing now is no different to that, simply because we have a lot of lost people hoping to find themselves in the words and actions of other people. And that never works in any context, never mind religion. So know yourself, do the hard work.
By an axe.
Yeah, but that's part of me knowing myself or getting to know aspects of me, if you like.
All right. So do we have anything else, Kristen?
Do you think we covered everything?
Yeah, we got kind of his book, so I'm happy about that.
I think we... Yeah.
All right, well, I'm very pleased, and I know that this discussion will never end because it's, it's an ongoing thing, something that's very elemental. And I have echo.
Yeah, for business purposes, I would finish by saying that, the customer service is the key thing. I mean, I sent a book to a gentleman, David's book, who, for his own reasons, wasn't able to get it. So I wanted to send this book to somebody else. And Ammon came in. So within just a few minutes of us talking here at the end, I jumped online. I got Amazon in chat because I couldn't talk to them on the phone right now or anything. The guy from Amazon came back to talk to me within 30 seconds, I think. Considering the size of their company, it's amazing that they can do this. And then I went ahead and explained that I bought this book and I need to send it to a different address. The guy goes and says, let me take a quick peek. Do you have the order number? I said, I don't have the order number. He says, looks like you bought 3 books, called Tribe Called Trust by David Amerland, and 2 of them have been reclaimed. 1 of them hasn't been. Who would you like to send it to? And so I gave him, the email address. The guy immediately says, it's taken care of. It's on his way. I mean, that's how customer service should be done. And this is, to me, how companies can make absolutely positive that people are going to be trusting them to do business with them when you provide that level. It's really simple. It's not anything complicated. They didn't step out of their way. They didn't do anything unbelievably extraordinary. But they took care of my specific need right here and right now. And for that, I absolutely adore Amazon.
Oh, it didn't make you feel like you really matter. Because
Totally.
they did that. Yeah. And that's the magic. I totally agree with you. Amazon does a lot of things incredibly well. And they do it because they have thought through the processes which make every one of their millions of customers feel that they matter.
Billions.
And I think that's really important.
I think
that's exactly.
This comes back to that point you were making about John Lewis earlier. One of the core things here is when employees feel invested in the company, feel like representatives of the company, they make better decisions. They treat you as their customers instead of somebody they've just got to get through the day. They're not just counting down the hours. I get paid by the hour. It doesn't matter what I do. They're actually thinking about the future and representation of the company and how they deal with customers. And that's cool.
Yeah, that's spot on again. Amon, you're right.
Gina, last thoughts?
Well, I was just thinking about the level of investment that we have in a relationship and our willingness to be transparent and to actually care. And so when we've got that and we can match it with the people that we're interacting with, then we stand a better chance of working through any of the conflicts and building deeper trust. And I do think that when those conflicts arise, when we sort of match them, meet them, then we have the opportunity of deepening our relationships. I think that was really true. We were talking about that earlier. So, and it's such a moving target. It's trust is really constantly changing because context is constantly changing and every relationship is constantly changing, and so it's one of those things where it can be very hard to kind of grasp and define. But David obviously has done an extraordinary job of taking it apart. It's like incredible.
Yeah, one thing that Gina and I were talking about was that you took something so elemental and you were able to pull every academic aspect that you could possibly think of and create something so you have this dichotomy that's just beautiful. And I just really think that that's really nice, and we've come to expect that from you, so please continue.
Don't stop now.
I'm trying.
And David assured us that next week he's going to finally announce what the new book is going to be about.
Oh, yay! Very cool.
Next week. Excellent.
My final thought was just feeding off of what Gina was talking about in the space, how it's constantly changing. And going forward, I think businesses more than ever really need to concentrate and focus on these values, fundamental values in relationships, because we are in relationships with our customers. We're no longer an entity apart from our humanity. Anyone else want to say anything else?
I think we covered everything in pretty much every aspect. It's a very human thing. If we forget that humanity, then flawed as it is always, then things begin to go wrong very quickly.
I
Thank you
do
so
think that the one thing that really sticks with me is what Gina was saying about transparency. It's so important to understand not only does trust go wrong with assumptions, but trust is built on assumptions. Trust is an assumption that if I do this, you will reciprocate in a certain way. It is an assumption. So being very clear up front with our position helps make sure that those are the right kind of assumptions going forwards. A lot of businesses act in ways they think are perfectly reasonable from their perspective and not understanding the client's perspective, whereas the customer just wants to be treated like a person and doesn't understand the business issues. And that's, of course, where a hell of a lot of these problems come from. So by being clear about what you can and can't do early on, that often helps with making sure that trust happens, that you're trusted in the right things.
Okay. Anyone else? Oleg, anyone? Now or forever hold your peace until next time.
Every time we say something, there's more to say.
I know,
It's
because
one
we're
of the-
constantly
Next week-
growing upon each other's thoughts.
We're gonna take apart the concept of divorces.
Nice.
Okay.
I have no experience.
I'm liking this. Okay. Thank you, everyone who has come and been part of this. Just it's always lovely to meet as friends and talk about everything under the sun and how it relates to everything else. And really appreciate your time and the trust that you put in us. And we trust you as well.
Thank you.
Take care.